everyone, welcome to History on Trial, Science on Trial Community Classroom. We're going to be continuing our discussion related to the current situation, and we're going to be looking very specifically at why certain groups of males are considered at higher than average risk for developing or contracting this particular microbe. Now, most have heard that individuals who are brown in America have a higher rate of susceptibility in terms of this particular microbe and also worse disease outcomes. And so what these researchers out of Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia are asserting is that this susceptibility, this risk factor that's going on, is not necessarily related to social conditions and structural racism, but it is instead related to genetics. And this is Dr. Tracy McCarthy, psychologist, attorney, and educator, and we're going to be uncovering the research, the science that addresses this genetic anomaly. For those of you who are of the R1b Y haplogroup, this is going to be very important information for you. This is important information, period. The R1b haplogroup is prevalent among those who are considered Black Americans, African Americans, sometimes being recorded at 1/3 of the population to 40% of the population. And this is that male DNA that is coming out of Western Europe. And so you are talking about those individuals out of Scotland, Ireland, Spain, France, England. And it's important to note that this is also the DNA that is often related to royal houses, royal dynasties coming out of Western Europe. If you look at any of the ancestry research, you will often find information suggesting that certain groups of monarchs and certain dynasties, in terms of males, possess this Y haplogroup, and it's that R1b. We're also going to look at where else that R1b has been located. It is far and wide in terms of its dispersion, and we're going to see that. But you can see here some of the presumptions related to monarchs coming out of Europe. You can see some information from England and Scotland and Portugal, also Austria. Okay, the first piece of research we're going to look at here came out in September, and this is factors influencing global variations in the current situations. We're looking at not only the cases, but also the fatalities. And here's just some quick data to look at, and you can see where certain countries, you can see the information related to case totals and mortality, also testing information related to population. And you can, of course, see that the United States is up at the top with an exorbitant number of tests based upon the population when you're comparing and contrasting with other countries across the world. And so you do see a high number in terms of cases and in terms of mortality. Now, it's not always clear how these are always being documented across the globe, but based upon this particular research, you can see that the numbers in the United States are exorbitant. Now, these researchers are indicating that there has been this assertion that Black people are more prone to this particular disease state than other people, and this is based upon having all of these comorbidities or underlying conditions, as you've heard, and also social factors and living in southern states that handled the situation differently at the onset. What the researchers are also indicating is that what has been left out of this discussion is that this particular microbe has strongly hit nations that have a prevalence of the R1b haplogroup. That is characteristic of Western Europe. It's also, as we've indicated, characteristic of a number of individuals that would be considered brown in America. And here we see additional research coming out in November. So this is pretty recent, and they are indicating that there is a potential influence of the human Y chromosome haplogroup on this particular situation, the prevalence and the mortality. Now, it's very interesting that this has not been discussed in the media. You do not hear this coming from the medical professions. You don't hear anyone talking about this. You just hear this blanket discussion related to race and social factors and structural racism and those sorts of things. There is no explanation for why these numbers are not the same in places such as Africa. And here we have these other researchers indicating yet again that there is a prevalence and mortality correlation related to this R1b haplogroup frequency. And this is not only in America, but this is also in the European countries. And so those European countries that have that high R1b haplogroup frequency, they have a higher rate in terms of prevalence, in terms of susceptibility, and in terms of mortality. And so, in other words, this particular microbe is picking and choosing its victims. These researchers are also indicating that the Y chromosome is influencing both immune and inflammatory responses. And so this is resulting in this sort of genetically programmed susceptibility to diseases with a strong immune component. Back in 2004, we had some researchers in the Journal of Forensic Science indicating that African Americans and Caucasian Americans had specific Y haplogroup types, and that there was some overlap, and then there were some distinctions, and we're going to quickly look at some of that overlap and distinction. And here you see an indication that a number of African Americans are in the R group, and at this time they indicated that this was about a 30% level in terms of the population of African Americans. You also see a uniqueness with African Americans with that A1, and that also goes along with that AOO that we've discussed before. That unique haplogroup for some African American males. But you also see this overlap with the R, and then you see that a number of individuals who are identified as Caucasian are also in the E group. And individuals often think of the E group as being a quote-unquote African, but you can see that there are certain E groups that are specific to Caucasian individuals. And so all of that is said to say that it's not as easy as simply looking at someone's phenotype to understand who they are. When you are looking at these Y haplogroups, you're really talking about the father. You can only have one father. And so when you are of one haplogroup, that's the haplogroup. That's the father group that you came from. You don't come from multiple father haplogroups. Another thing that's interesting to note about the R1b haplogroup is that there's an assertion in terms of the science looking back that King Tut also was of the R1b haplogroup. Now this would logically follow because you also have the Queen Scotia coming out of Egypt, going into Western Europe and populating that area known as the Isles. And so that's a part of their narrative. And it seems like it's also very consistent with this R1b being found in relation to King Tut, but R1b not being prevalent in current day Egypt. So in that same area, it's not prevalent there. That R1b is very prevalent in America and very prevalent in Western Europe and prevalent among those specific monarchs that we talked about. There are more, but there's an assumption that there is a prevalence among those particular dynasties that we've looked at. And then certain groups in the Caribbean. And here we have some additional research, again, coming out in November, and this is about the potential influence of the human Y chromosome haplogroup on this particular situation and mortality. And this involves a letter to the editor related to this particular research. And this author discusses this issue of prevalence and mortality rates having a strong correlation with this R1b haplogroup. And one thing that was noted was that in Europe, individuals like certain groups of Italians were highly susceptible and were having negative reactions in contrast to other groups of individuals. And so what's being suggested is that the R1b is not only serving as a frequency marker, but it's also a population marker. And so what you are seeing is perhaps an endemic dynamic going on versus a purely global dynamic. So you have certain groups of people, specifically certain groups of men, who are at higher than average risk for not only risk in terms of susceptibility, but also in terms of these negative outcomes and mortality. So again, you've got a microbe that is selecting its victims. And we're going to look at a little bit more research and information about this distribution of this R1b. Here you see some additional research related to a possible correlation between this particular contagion and this R1b haplogroup. This researcher also indicates that there is a high positive correlation between this susceptibility and the R1b. This isn't the first time that a microbe has been selective like this. You also have the HIV resistance in certain individuals who have a genetic makeup, and then you have that susceptibility for certain individuals related to that CCR5. Now, what's noteworthy about this research on this R1b susceptibility is you can even see this at the level of the island level. So you see differences in terms of risk between Haiti and the Dominican Republic, with the individuals of Haiti having a low transmission rate, a low mortality rate, when contrasted with the individuals in the Dominican Republic. This researcher also points out that there is this geographic stratification going on in Italy also. So you've got the same island in terms of Dominican Republic and Haiti, and then you have Italy, and you have this stratification going on there also, where groups in one part of Italy are impacted in a way that's different from those in other parts of Italy. And this again is related to that R1b haplogroup. This researcher indicates that this could be one of the reasons why Black people or other ethnic minorities are dying in disproportionate amounts in the UK and the US, where they live intermixed with R1b carriers, and why this is not the case in Africa or Asia. Now let's look more closely at this R1b distribution dynamic. We're going to quickly look at this diversity in terms of the Y haplogroup between the Dominican Republic and Haiti. And you're going to see that the Dominican Republic has numbers in terms of that Y haplogroup and that R1b that are substantially similar to the numbers in the United States. making the black males, the quote-unquote brown males of the Dominican Republic and the brown males of the United States of America being more similar, being more closely related perhaps than other males. And here you can see a discussion about the Y haplogroup dynamic in the Dominican Republic. And you can see that the most common one is the E1b1a. However, you can also see that just like in the United States, that R1b number is between 23 to 40% in the Dominican Republic. So it looks just like, for the most part, the brown males in the United States. And here, when you look at these numbers between the Dominican Republic and Haiti, you can see the variance here. So you see the confirmed number of cases in the Dominican Republic, well over 152,000, and then you see 9,000 for Haiti. And so there is a clear distinction going on here, and this is related to that R1b dynamic. And we're going to quickly go through some of the R1b dynamics going on in Africa, and you can see the low numbers. And so it is not the prevalent Y haplogroup in Africa, but it is prevalent among certain groups of people. And so you see at the top, you see with the number of individuals that were assessed in the Afro-Asiatic category, you have 20.8 in terms of R1b. Then you also have some Bantus also identified as R1b. You see some additional R1bs among the Beja or Beja. You also see some in northern and southern Cameroon, primarily in northern Cameroon. And then you also see some individuals, the Copts Sudanese. You see additional R1bs among the Fulani, certain groups of Fulani, and also the Hausa and the Herero. And here you see some additional numbers for Africa among the Nubians and also Chadic group. You see 95.5, and then a low number among the Pygmies, Western Pygmies. Here we see some additional numbers among certain Arab groups, also South African whites, and some Arabs in the Sudan, some Semitic Arabs in the Sudan, and also the Tuareg. We have looked at the science and the research on this dynamic whereby this microbe has an affinity for certain groups of people, particularly certain groups of males. This requires a significant amount of additional research. It's not clear how this microbe developed an affinity for a certain group of males in particular, and even given the name of the microbe, it seems to fit with the group of males for which it has an affinity, this SAR, R1b, and this affinity for those who appear to be descended from or related to those who are of particular dynastic and royal house groups. So it is not enough to say that a particular quote-unquote ethnic group has a certain susceptibility. It is really important to look very specifically at these Y haplogroups to get a better understanding of why certain males in certain countries appear to be more susceptible than others for this particular microbe that even carries the name suggesting that it is a microbe for a king. Those who will be doing additional research on this particular topic are encouraged to stop the video and not just do screenshots, but actually print out pages from the video so that they can actually have those copies on hand. It's not enough to just keep things digitally. You need to keep hard copies of things. And so you might want to actually look at the actual research documents and download those and actually make hard copies. And so you can have those. Also, if you are a channel and your name appears in the subject line, that is because this video is directed to you and those that you are communicating with. So it is determined that there is some relevance in this discussion for your channel and the discussions that you are having with the community of people. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.